Brutal statements from Lewis Hamilton after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix under the relentless neon glow of Jeddah's skyline spiraled into an unrelenting nightmare for Lewis Hamilton, a race weekend so saturated with frustration and disbelief that it carved itself into the harshest pages of his monumental career. What was meant to be a pivotal moment, a display of resurgence and raw mastery under the stifling desert heat, instead devolved into an agonizing portrait of struggle, isolation, and heartbreak beneath the ruthless glare of the world's cameras. From the moment Hamilton's Ferrari rolled out onto the circuit for free practice, the omens whispered of trouble. The SF-25, heralded for its straight-line prowess and agile cornering, seemed alien beneath him, a machine that refused to dance to the rhythm of his touch. While other drivers found confidence early, Lewis fought a battle invisible to the timing screens, a silent war against instability, against mistrust in the very core of his tools. Lap after lap, he searched for harmony, adjusting brake balance, tweaking differential settings, pleading for grip that stubbornly evaded him like a ghost. As qualifying approached, hopes flickered among the Ferrari faithful that Hamilton's genius could conjure a miracle when it mattered most. But reality, brutal and unsparing, refused to bend. In the final minutes of Q3, when engines screamed at full tilt and every corner demanded perfection, Hamilton wrestled the SF-25 to its limits only to find himself glaring at the timesheets in disbelief, a soul-crushing half-second adrift of Charles Leclerc's blistering pole attempt. The deficit wasn't simply a statistic. It was an indictment, a flashing neon warning that things were worse than they appeared. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. On Sunday, the dusk melted into night, the circuit bathed in artificial brilliance, the temperature still searing, the tension suffocating. As the engines roared to life on the grid, Hamilton sat in his cockpit, face obscured behind his reflective visor, fists clenching and unclenching on the steering wheel, trying to summon the warrior within. The red lights blinked out, and 20 cars lunged into the darkness, wheels spinning, exhausts flaring, a mechanized stampede unleashed. Hamilton's start was neither disastrous nor electrifying, it was merely ordinary, and in a field where mediocrity meant death, it condemned him to purgatory. As the laps unfolded, he clung grimly to P7, unable to close the gap to those ahead, unable to fend off the creeping presence of those behind. He pushed the car to its limits, tried different lines through the corners, varied his battery deployment strategies, juggled tire temperatures with desperate precision, all to no avail. The SF-25 remained stubbornly inert beneath him, indifferent to his legendary touch. Every lap was a battle not with rivals but with physics itself, as understeer in the medium speed sections robbed him of mid-corner rotation and brutal snap oversteer punished any attempt to aggressively attack exits. His radio messages, transmitted in tight, clipped bursts, painted a picture of mounting despair. Words like no grip, front washing out, and rear unstable became the grim chorus of his Sunday night symphony. Tire degradation, long the Achilles heel for Ferrari, reared its monstrous head with savage vengeance. Where Leclerc artfully extended his medium stint, managing his tires with finesse and strategic brilliance to engineer a late race attack, Hamilton found himself nursing carcasses that disintegrated beneath him. Forced into an earlier pit stop, he tumbled into traffic, every attempt to fight back met with stubborn resistance and rising tire temperatures that turned defense into agony. Strategists scrambled for solutions, proposing undercuts, overcuts, alternate pace targets. But the truth was cruelly simple. Hamilton had no weapons at his disposal. He was a lion trapped in a snare, his roar reduced to a growl of helpless frustration. As the race wore on, the gap to the leaders ballooned beyond 30 seconds, an eternity in the ruthless calculus of Formula One. Over team radio, Hamilton's silence grew longer, more oppressive, broken only by occasional terse affirmations or exhausted feedback. His body fought, his mind strategized, his soul demanded more, but the machinery under him yielded nothing. When the checkered flag finally waved, signaling an end not just to the race but to a weekend of dashed dreams, Hamilton crossed the line in the same position he had started, invisible to the roving broadcast cameras chasing podium celebrations. P7, a number that, on paper, hinted at mediocrity but in reality, encapsulated humiliation. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Inside the Ferrari garage, there was no celebration for him. Mechanics offered muted gestures of solidarity, claps on the back that felt hollow against the heavy air of disappointment. Team principal Fred Vasseur met Hamilton with a nod that spoke volumes, an unspoken acknowledgement that they had collectively failed one of the greatest to ever grace the sport. The contrast could not have been more brutal. On the other side of the Ferrari garage, Leclerc stood triumphant, hoisting the trophy aloft as flashes from 1,000 cameras captured his smile. Journalists swarmed him, fans chanted his name, Maranello's dream seemed reignited. Yet in Hamilton's corner, there was only the heavy silence of a team grappling with fractured expectations. The post-race media scrum offered no refuge. Hamilton faced the microphones with the stoicism of a veteran, answering questions with grim honesty. He praised the team's efforts, admitted his struggles, refused to shift blame, but every word carried the unmistakable weight of deeper frustration. He confessed that he was still searching for the connection he needed with the SF25, that the car's handling characteristics remained elusive, unpredictable, slippery when pushed to the edges where he lived and thrived. The paddock buzzed with theories. Some speculated that Hamilton's driving style, honed over years of Mercedes-specific engineering philosophy, was incompatible with Ferrari's aerodynamic and mechanical package. Others whispered about internal pressures, of a team split between nurturing their existing star in Leclerc and adapting to their new titan. Whichever theory proved true, one reality remained stark and chilling. If Jeddah had been a test, Hamilton had failed it, and the clock was already ticking mercilessly. As night deepened and the fans slowly filtered out into the Arabian darkness, Hamilton sat alone in his garage for several minutes, helmet still on, visor still down, motionless amidst the noise and chaos around him. Engineers gave him space. Photographers respectfully kept their distance. In that solitary figure, every heartbreak of the weekend was captured. The crushing burden of expectation, the searing pain of falling short, the cruel indifference of a sport that never waits for anyone, not even the greatest. There was no rage, no explosive outburst. Only a heavy, seeping melancholy, a rare vulnerability shown by a man who had spent 2 decades defying the impossible. Lewis Hamilton had come to Jeddah seeking victory. He left carrying a wound that would take far longer than a single week to heal. Whether he could rally, adapt, and reignite his charge toward destiny, or whether this race marked the first irreversible crack in his final quest, remained unknown. But one thing was certain: Formula One had once again reminded everyone that it is a cruel, merciless arena, and even the gods can fall. In the relentless stillness that followed the checkered flag, as the floodlights of the paddock illuminated faces lined with exhaustion and unspoken tension, Lewis Hamilton confronted the brutal reality of a weekend that had slipped through his fingers. There was no sugarcoating his emotions, no attempt at diplomacy or masking his frustration behind rehearsed platitudes. His words carried the full weight of bitter truth, heavy with the kind of honesty that only surfaces when pride is wounded and expectations have been shattered beyond recognition. There wasn't a single moment this weekend where I felt at one with the car, he admitted, his voice low, strained, and uncharacteristically vulnerable. Not even for a second. The admission stunned those who listened, not merely for its content, but for the sheer rawness in Hamilton's tone, a confession that cut deeper than any loss he had suffered in recent years. There was a heaviness to him, an invisible burden dragging at his posture, a man fighting not only an unforgiving racetrack but something more elusive and haunting: disconnection. What made his words resonate even more painfully was the deliberate absence of blame toward Ferrari's engineering team. There was no finger-pointing, no public frustration directed at those who had built the machine he could not tame. Instead, Hamilton acknowledged what everyone could see but few dared to vocalize. Clearly, the car has podium capability. Charles showed everyone that, he continued, the corners of his mouth pulling downward in a grimace that was more resignation than anger. I don't have the answer why I can't extract that same performance. It's like every move I make, the car resists. It's a constant fight, like trying to drive a wild horse that won't be broken. As the journalists scribbled notes and technicians listened with somber expressions, the data behind Hamilton's struggles painted an even bleaker portrait. Deep within Ferrari's data analysis center, telemetry reports told a silent but unmistakable story of frustration unfolding lap after punishing lap. Hamilton's times through the braking zones, historically one of his greatest strengths, had become a glaring vulnerability. Where Leclerc managed to glide into corners with sharp, laser-precise entries, Hamilton fought the SF24 with every fiber of his being, struggling to hit apexes with the precision the car demanded. Turn 16, the infamous high-speed pivot at the Jeddah Corniche circuit, became the symbol of the weekend's collapse. Sector analysis revealed that while Leclerc consistently gained precious milliseconds through smooth, early braking and optimal throttle pickup, Hamilton lagged behind, losing time not just once, but systematically, lap after lap. The Ferrari engineers, observing this alarming pattern, advised a revised approach, suggesting earlier brake applications to improve stability and conserve momentum through the treacherous bend. Leclerc adapted almost instantly. Hamilton, bewilderingly, could not. It wasn't a matter of refusing advice. It was a deeper issue of instinct, of muscle memory colliding with a machine whose demands defied everything he had internalized over more than a decade at the pinnacle of motorsport. Every small hesitation at the braking points, every slight misjudgment of angle and speed, compounded over distance, until what should have been hundredths of a second became glaring deficits. By the final stages of the race, those accumulated errors had built an invisible wall he could no longer scale. Inside Ferrari's sleek but suffocatingly tense motorhome, what was supposed to be a calm debrief spiraled into an urgent, high-stakes strategy session. Engineers hunched over telemetry sheets and simulation data, their faces etched with concern. Frédéric Vasseur, usually measured even in adversity, allowed the smallest trace of frustration to creep into his voice when later addressing reporters. "We had a straightforward discussion with Lewis after the race," Vasseur remarked, his French accent sharper than usual. It was difficult for him. The inconsistency started early in the weekend. There were moments, during the second stint particularly, where his natural speed showed itself, flashes of brilliance, but flashes are not enough at this level. We need a complete performance, sustained across every lap and every run. That's the standard we expect and demand. Behind the scenes, the gravity of the situation went beyond a simple bad weekend. Hamilton, never one to hide behind excuses, dropped a chilling remark during the internal debrief, a quip meant to inject a bit of levity, but instead casting a long, dark shadow. "Feels like I need a brain transplant to figure this car out," he had said, forcing a hollow chuckle that evaporated almost immediately in the heavy atmosphere of the meeting room. Those words traveled quickly up the chain of command in Maranello. They weren't simply the frustrated outburst of a competitive driver. They were a red flag, a warning sign that what Ferrari faced was not just a technical mismatch, but a profound existential challenge. Ferrari does not seek drivers who merely manage their machines. They demand drivers who become one with them, who can evolve their instincts and reshape their muscle memory until man and machine are fused in purpose and execution. To hear Lewis Hamilton, the most instinctive, adaptable driver of his generation, hint at mental incompatibility with the SF-24 was nothing short of an earthquake inside Ferrari. Their project was not built around the idea of gradual accommodation. It was built on the expectation of immediate greatness, a greatness that now looked precariously out of reach. Theories circulated quickly among engineers and analysts alike. Was it the peculiar nature of Ferrari's mid-corner dynamics, still fundamentally different from the stability-focused Mercedes platforms Hamilton had mastered for years? Was it a braking system that demanded an alien sensitivity, or perhaps a steering feedback profile that jarred with his deepest instincts? Some even wondered if Hamilton's struggle was a sign of deeper psychological fatigue after years of carrying the crushing expectations of greatness. Nobody dared speak aloud the darkest speculation, that Hamilton's superhuman ability to instantly adapt, the hallmark of his dominance, might finally be facing its limits. As the paddock emptied under the cooling night sky, Hamilton remained behind, lingering outside the Ferrari motorhome long after the engineers had retreated to the simulator rooms and the hospitality areas had fallen silent. He stood alone, helmet dangling from one hand, gaze lost in the shimmering lights reflecting off the asphalt. He didn't need anyone to tell him what the data said. He could feel it in his bones. The dissonance between man and machine, the fractions of a second slipping away, the moments where instinct and reality betrayed each other, they were more punishing than any journalist's critique could ever be. For Lewis Hamilton, it was never just about winning races. It was about becoming one with the machine, about creating symphonies out of speed and balance and risk. It was about mastery, not mere survival. And standing there, alone with the night creeping in around him, he realized that this next climb, this next chapter, would demand more from him than any championship ever had. He would have to unlearn habits that had made him a legend. He would have to rebuild his connection with the car from the ground up, find a new rhythm, a new instinct. Or he would have to face the unthinkable. That some mountains, even for the greatest among us, remain forever just out of reach. Beneath the carefully managed interviews, beyond the rehearsed smiles and PR-polished soundbites, the true alarm reverberates within the stark telemetry comparisons now haunting Ferrari's engineering department. The cold, unforgiving data paints a brutally honest picture. Sector by sector, corner by corner, the story unfolds with merciless clarity. Lewis Hamilton, one of the sport's most decorated champions, is grappling with a Ferrari that refuses to yield to his will. Unlike Max Verstappen at Red Bull, who carves through corners with an almost predatory precision, balancing on the knife's edge between control and chaos with terrifying ease, Hamilton appears to be fighting the SF24 rather than mastering it. The telemetry is a brutal autopsy of the problem. Where Verstappen dances with his machinery, manipulating it with subtle flicks and weight shifts that extract maximum performance from even the trickiest setups, Hamilton's inputs show hesitation, corrections, and micro-adjustments that bleed tenths of a second with every lap. The Ferrari demands unwavering confidence on corner entry, absolute commitment under braking, and surgical throttle modulation on exits. And right now, Hamilton cannot consistently deliver the delicate symphony this car demands. In contrast, Charles Leclerc, Ferrari's perennial hope, has been quietly shouldering a disproportionate share of the burden. While the spotlight inevitably follows Hamilton wherever he goes, it is Leclerc's dogged consistency, his ruthless qualifying performances, and his adaptability that are keeping Ferrari's championship aspirations barely afloat. Without Leclerc's relentless tenacity, the team's position in the constructors' standings would already be sinking into the quicksand of irrelevance. His ability to wrestle results from an unpredictable and temperamental machine has earned him silent respect within Maranello's corridors, even if the outside world remains transfixed by Hamilton's every move. Hamilton, for his part, is battling a war on two fronts: the physical struggle to tame the car, and the psychological battle to maintain composure amidst rising doubts. After each grueling race weekend, he faces the media with a mask of stoic optimism, carefully calibrating his words to project resilience without slipping into denial. "It's not the end of the world," Hamilton said after the latest race, his voice carefully even, his body language betraying subtle exhaustion. "There's a mountain of lap time sitting there that I'm not unlocking yet. I'm losing 2/10 in Sector 1, another 3 in Sector 3. It's just not good enough. I'm pushing every hour of the day to figure it out, but it's not coming together the way I need it to. I understand the fans' frustration. I understand the team's frustration. I understand the leadership's frustration. And trust me, no one is more frustrated than I am." The words were calm. The reality, anything but. Behind the scenes, the pressure is mounting like a powder keg with a lit fuse. Hamilton's move to Ferrari was not just a transfer, it was a gamble for legacy. It was a shot at immortality, at writing the final glorious chapter of his career with the most storied team in Formula One history. But that dream now teeters on the edge of collapse, and the stakes could not be higher. Throughout his career, whispers have followed Hamilton, that he prospered because he always had the best machinery, that he never endured the soul-crushing grind of dragging inferior equipment into contention like Senna, like Schumacher, like Alonso. Detractors argued he had never been forced to build from rubble, to reconstruct a dynasty from ashes. They wondered if he could truly develop a car rather than simply refine a winning formula. Now, those doubts aren't whispers anymore. They are shouted in paddock backrooms, debated in boardrooms, plastered across headlines and screamed in comment sections around the world. With each passing race, with each weekend where Hamilton fails to extract magic from the SF24, the narrative tightens like a vice. And complicating matters even further is the ticking clock of the 2026 regulation overhaul, the biggest technical reset since the hybrid era began. Ferrari's leadership faces an agonizing decision. How much longer do they continue investing precious resources into salvaging a faltering 2025 campaign, knowing that every hour spent now could be a step behind for 2026? Quiet conversations are already underway within Ferrari's highest circles about pulling engineering focus away from this year's car and accelerating development on the new chassis and power unit for the future. Should that decision become official, Hamilton's nightmare deepens. Every part, every update, every innovation not developed for the SF24 leaves him more isolated, more vulnerable. It would mean fewer setup experiments, fewer aerodynamic tweaks to explore, fewer avenues to solve the fundamental discord between driver and machine. It would leave him fighting an uphill battle with dulled weapons while rivals arm themselves for war. On track, the chasm is most evident over a single lap, qualifying, the purest test of nerve, reflex, and synergy. Here, Hamilton's struggles are laid bare for all to see. While over race distances his veteran experience allows him to manage tires, fuel loads, and racecraft to claw back positions, when the stopwatch rules all, he is too often found wanting. In Jeddah, On the unforgiving high-speed street circuit where bravery is rewarded and hesitation punished, Hamilton languished outside the top 10 during all 3 practice sessions. The telemetry showed it vividly, lifting earlier, braking sooner, correcting mid-corner where others were flat out. When the pressure peaked in Q2, Hamilton's desperate push yielded only the slimmest of margins, barely dragging himself into Q3 with a lap that lacked his usual flair, missing apexes by inches, bleeding speed on exits. In Q3 itself, the gaps widened alarmingly. He was a passenger in a contest where once he had been the conductor. The Ferrari engineers, poring over gigabytes of data late into the night, find themselves increasingly puzzled. Hamilton's feedback is extensive, but at times contradictory. He wants sharper front-end grip, but also demands rear-end stability. He complains of understeer on entry, yet accuses the rear tires of snapping away under throttle. Setup changes yield minor improvements, but nothing transformative. It is as if the SF24 speaks a dialect Hamilton has yet to master, and the team fears he may not have the time to learn it before the season slips beyond saving. Within the politics-laden environment of Maranello, where alliances form and fracture with every heartbeat, dangerous conversations are taking root. Whispers of contingency plans, of backup strategies, of what Ferrari's future might look like if Hamilton cannot turn the tide. Executives exchange worried glances. Senior engineers speak in hushed tones behind closed doors. And deep down, in places no press release can reach, some are beginning to wonder, did Ferrari bet everything on a legend whose best days are now irretrievably behind him? Among the tifosi, the famously passionate but unforgiving Ferrari faithful, the mood is shifting. Their patience, once limitless at the announcement of Hamilton's arrival, now frays with each podium missed, each pole position surrendered. They do not demand perfection, they never have. But they demand fight. They demand blood, sweat, and suffering for the badge. They demand that a Ferrari driver live and die by the sword, not coast on reputation. And as the sun sets on another turbulent weekend, the existential question looms ever larger. Can Lewis Hamilton reshape his destiny one final time, bending the will of Maranello's iron traditions to forge a new empire in red? Or will he, like so many before him, become just another ghost wandering the haunted halls of Ferrari's broken dreams? Lewis Hamilton stood there, surrounded by a wall of flashing cameras, microphones pointed at his face like a firing squad, the heat of the media pen pressing down on him. His posture was composed, as always, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of tension in his stance, a tightness around his mouth, a heaviness in his voice that even the casual observer could sense. Beneath the surface of calm professionalism was a man grappling with a battle far greater than the stopwatch could ever reveal. "I'm just thankful to have made it into Q3, he said, his voice quieter than usual, carrying a subdued tone that betrayed a glimpse into the inner storm raging within. It wasn't the lap I needed. Nowhere near spectacular, to be honest. I needed something special, something clean, and I just couldn't piece it together today. Still, I'm grateful to be up there, grateful to have a shot to fight. But this car, bonding with it over one lap, it's proving incredibly difficult. Much harder than I ever imagined." The words fell into the air with a weight that hung heavy, as though Hamilton himself knew they would echo far beyond the immediate media scrum, seeping into headlines and analyst tables by nightfall. This was not the defiant, battle-hardened Lewis Hamilton the world had grown accustomed to, the man who could wrestle a car beyond its natural limits, who could defy physics with sheer willpower alone. This was a Lewis Hamilton confronting a machine that refused to yield, a dance partner whose rhythm he could not match no matter how instinctively he moved. Within the pristine but increasingly pressured environment of the Ferrari motorhome, the atmosphere was even more tense. Engineers, aerodynamicists, tire specialists, the architects behind the SF25, exchanged grim glances over their monitors, their screens flashing with data they could not spin into optimism. In whispered conversations behind closed doors, Shanghai had been earmarked weeks ago as the critical threshold, the acid test for the Hamilton-Ferrari partnership. If Lewis could not extract magic here, on a track that had long been his personal playground, then the reality of their predicament would be impossible to deny. Frederic Vasseur, normally a master at shielding the team from external panic, did not bother wrapping the situation in comforting platitudes. His assessment was blunt, clinical, devastating. "We have been losing 3/10 in the first sector from the very first lap of the weekend," Vasseur stated, his face an unreadable mask but his voice slicing through the tension. The same weaknesses persisted into qualifying. Lewis finds himself nearly a second behind pole position. When you cannot trust the car completely, Especially on circuits where the walls are so punishingly close, the consequences are immediate and merciless. There was no need to read between the lines. The meaning was clear. Ferrari's dream of Lewis Hamilton riding to an 8th World Championship title in the famous scarlet colors was slipping, fading, disintegrating under the relentless weight of mechanical incompatibility and rising internal urgency. Deep within the paddock, the conversations had already shifted from hopeful to pragmatic. Influential figures, sponsors, and even Ferrari board members were now pressing quietly but firmly for a reallocation of resources toward the 2026 car project. Behind polite smiles and firm handshakes, decisions were being made, decisions that could soon render the rest of the 2025 season an exercise in damage limitation rather than title contention. Meanwhile, on the broader stage of Formula One, the championship tables told a story that numbers alone could scarcely capture. Max Verstappen, ruthless and unrelenting, continued to dominate with a precision that bordered on inevitability. Lando Norris, with youthful swagger, carved his own path to superstardom at McLaren. Oscar Piastri, cold and analytical, methodically dismantled the notion of experience as a prerequisite for success. George Russell, once Hamilton's protégé, now loomed larger with each passing weekend as a symbol of the shifting generational tide. And where was Hamilton in this tableau? Drifting. Isolated. Fighting not merely against his rivals, but against the very machine beneath him, a machine that, by some cruel twist of fate, seemed intent on rejecting him at every turn. The SF-25 was a paradox, on its best behavior during fleeting moments of low fuel and clear air, but otherwise a wild, unpredictable beast. Its rear instability under braking was vicious, its balance through mid-speed corners capricious, its throttle response twitchy and uneven. On high-speed stretches, where confidence should breed aggression, it delivered only nervous, skittish energy. The steering feedback, once an extension of Hamilton's racing soul, now felt muted, alien, distrustful. Every correction at the wheel was a guess rather than a command. Every apex was a compromise. For Hamilton, a driver whose greatness had been built on the fusion of mind, body, and machine into a single entity, this dissonance was intolerable. In the past, he could transcend flawed machinery through instinct, through belief. He had turned broken cars into race winners through sheer audacity and genius. But this Ferrari defied all his usual tools. It demanded not brilliance, but mechanical obedience, something that clashed fundamentally with his very DNA. The critics outside the paddock began sharpening their knives. Commentators who once hailed Hamilton as untouchable now questioned whether he had lost the final edge. Pundits speculated whether the twilight of his career had come too late, whether Ferrari had gambled on a fading legend rather than a still-burning force of nature. In studio panels and on social media feeds, armchair experts picked apart every sector time, every radio message, every post-race interview, hunting for evidence of decline. But those who truly knew Hamilton understood something different. The fight inside him had not diminished. If anything, the adversity was forging a newer, sharper version of himself, a warrior stripped of illusions, fueled by pure, unrelenting pride and defiance. He wasn't racing just for titles anymore. He was racing against time, against the machinery that betrayed him, against the creeping narrative that history was already writing his ending without his consent. Shanghai would not just be another weekend. It would be an inflection point. A battlefield where Hamilton would either resurrect the dying dream with an act of impossible brilliance or confront the brutal truth that even legends cannot bend fate forever. There was no more margin for patience. No more allowances for slow adaptation. The world's expectations were a mountain on his shoulders. Ferrari's internal struggles were cracks beneath his feet. His rival's relentless pace was a storm closing in. But somewhere deep inside, beyond the bruised ego, beyond the frustration, beyond the cold statistics and mechanical failures, the fire still raged. The same fire that had once lifted a young boy from Stevenage onto the throne of motorsport. The same fire that had defied discrimination, defeat, and doubt at every turn of his life. The same fire that, even in the darkest moments, refused to flicker out. Lewis Hamilton wasn't done. Not yet. Not today. Not until he had wrung every last ounce of fight from his soul and left it all, every dream, every scar, every heartbeat, on the racetrack where he had built his legend. Martin Brundle, a man whose decades of experience in Formula One have made him one of the most perceptive and respected commentators in the sport, didn't hold back as he dissected the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix during Sky F1's post-race analysis. His voice, usually steady and methodical, carried a different weight that night, a mixture of concern, disbelief, and reluctant acknowledgement of what many in the paddock had started to whisper behind closed doors. He spoke with the authority of someone who had witnessed the careers of countless champions, Prost, Senna, Schumacher, and recognized the unmistakable signs of a hero grappling with the slow erosion of supremacy. There were times during Lewis Hamilton's heyday, Brundle remarked thoughtfully, the words dragging with gravity, when you could watch an entire Grand Prix unfold and never see him lose 0.7 of a second across an entire race distance, let alone bleed that much time within a single sector. Witnessing him now, watching the growing hesitations, the small miscalculations stacking up lap after lap, the faith he once had in the car's behavior crumbling in real time, it's unsettling. It's like seeing a master pianist suddenly second-guess the keys beneath his fingers. He wasn't wrong. Throughout the weekend in Jeddah, Lewis Hamilton, the man who had redefined excellence, who had shattered records with the effortless grace of a natural-born phenomenon, looked uncharacteristically mortal. His steering corrections were sharper, more urgent. His radio messages, once clipped and commanding, now bordered on plaintive. His body language, usually composed and unreadable, showed the strain of a driver fighting battles not just against rivals, but against his own machine, his own doubts. Brundle expanded his analysis, hinting that Hamilton and Ferrari might have fundamentally misstepped in their developmental direction. The qualities that Hamilton demanded, a car that rotated sharply on entry, that responded instantly to minute inputs, that allowed him to play with the limits, seemed at odds with the aerodynamic profile and mechanical grip characteristics Ferrari had managed to conjure this season. Instead of a symphony between driver and machine, it resembled a constant argument. Every corner exit, every braking zone, was a negotiation rather than a seamless expression of talent. It was as if Hamilton was wrestling a wild animal, not guiding a thoroughbred. And it showed. The desperation seeping into his performances was no longer subtle. The small mistakes, a tiny lockup here, an early throttle application there, were beginning to multiply. Moments of brilliance still flashed, but they were now islands in an ocean of struggle. The aura of invincibility, that intangible weapon which had once intimidated rivals before a wheel had even turned, was fraying. Inside the Ferrari garage, the mood had shifted. Engineers hunched over telemetry data, searching for answers in graphs that offered only uncomfortable truths. Mechanics murmured to each other in the shadows, speaking in hushed tones about missed opportunities and misguided setup changes. Team leaders convened in private rooms, far away from the media's prying eyes, grappling with questions that had no easy answers. Were they watching a temporary slump, a great champion adjusting to a new temperamental machine? Or were they witnessing the irreversible decline of an icon? Beneath the glossy surface of press releases and carefully managed interviews, Ferrari's senior figures were already contemplating brutal strategic pivots. The whispers grew louder. Should they begin sacrificing development resources for the current car, and instead shift their focus entirely onto the 2026 regulations overhaul? Should they gamble their future on new concepts, new drivers, new energy, even if it meant leaving Hamilton stranded in a no-man's land, piloting an increasingly obsolete machine through another long, painful season? If they did, it would mark a cold but calculated betrayal, the kind of ruthless decision that defined the cutthroat world of Formula One at its highest level. Loyalty was a currency rarely spent when titles were at stake. Among the global fanbase, emotions ran even hotter. Social media erupted with polarized opinions. Some passionately defended Hamilton, arguing that true greatness transcends short-term results, that even the most legendary warriors falter before staging their ultimate comeback. Others, with less mercy, claimed the fairy tale was crumbling before their eyes, that Ferrari and Hamilton had both misjudged their timing, and the sport had already moved on without them. Forum threads lit up with frame-by-frame breakdowns of Hamilton's laps, slow-motion replays of his missed apexes, endless debates over whether it was Hamilton slipping, Ferrari failing, or some agonizing combination of both. The questions loomed, dark and insistent, over every conversation. Was there still enough time for Hamilton to rally? Could he claw his way back from the brink, summon the defiant brilliance that had once seen him storm from the back of the grid to victory? Or was he, even now, unknowingly scripting a swan song that would end not with fireworks and championships, but with quiet disappointment? And what about Ferrari? Would they abandon him before the final battle was even fought? Would they coldly turn their attention to 2026, to younger blood, fresher ideas, leaving the most celebrated driver of his generation to fade into the background, chasing podiums while others battle for titles? Each passing race would only sharpen these questions further. Each missed Q3 appearance, each clumsy pit stop, Each weary interview answer would stack another brick onto the wall, separating what could have been from what reality was becoming. Hamilton, for his part, fought on with the only tools he had left: experience, determination, pride. There was no public complaining. No throwing the team under the bus. Only stoic acceptance mixed with quiet, simmering frustration. The same man who once won races against impossible odds now found himself celebrating 7th places and minor points finishes, forcing smiles for cameras he once commanded like a king. And yet, there was still something dangerous there. Something volatile. Something unbroken. For all the doubt swirling around him, Lewis Hamilton remained Lewis Hamilton. The man who had rewritten the record books. The man who had defied odds more times than his critics cared to remember. If anyone could find a way to bend fate one final time, it was him. But the window was closing. The moments were slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. And no amount of talent, no amount of will, could turn back the clock forever. As the night deepened over the Jeddah Corniche, as the team trucks rolled out into the dark, as the floodlights blinked off one by one, the question wasn't just whether Hamilton's final chapter could still end in triumph. It was whether the chapter was already being written without him even realizing it. The sands of time were falling, and the race against oblivion had truly begun.